talk for this afternoon is entitled Climate Change and Bible Prophecy. And there are few subjects that are talked about today in the media, in the news, like climate change. You cannot open the news websites without coming across it. You cannot be paying attention to anything that is going on in this earth, I think, as a Seventh-day Adventist, and be unaware of the very significant global events that are taking place in this realm. Yet, we know that there are prominent people who say that this is irrelevant to Bible prophecy. In fact, I was listening to a sermon. Pastor remains nameless, but the pastor was saying, this subject is not related to the fulfillment of prophecy. Not only that, you should not be watching the papacy. That's not something you need to be doing. So, without further ado, we're going to open up the subject that is fast overtaking the entire planet. We'll begin with some facts. A majority of U.S. adults, 54%, describe climate change as a major threat to the country's well-being. That's from a survey from August 2023. You'll notice that that is a majority. Among Americans age 18 to 29, 48% say that the U.S. should exclusively use renewables. That is exclusively. No coal, no oil, no gas, nothing. In 2021, a survey of 10,000 people aged 18 to 25 turned back the results that 75% of young people say the future is frightening. More than 50% of survey respondents said they felt all of the following: sad, anxious, angry, powerless, helpless, and guilty about climate change. And to be honest with you, that's the way that the elite want to make you feel. 4 in 10 people around the world are hesitant to have children as a result of the climate crisis. 41% of French residents support a limit of 4 flights per lifetime. You've probably all used up your allotment, haven't you? That number jumps to 59% of young people aged 18 to 24. So the majority of people are concerned about this issue. They think it's frightening and that it is an imminent threat to the well-being and the prosperity of humanity. Now, I think again, just like the previous subject, that we are to some extent insulated against the sentiment that is so prevalent in the community. Most of you here sitting in the congregation, you weren't recently in grade school. It was a while ago. And so we are not aware of what the younger generation is being fed. Would you say that that's fair to say? Okay. We're going to look at a few things here. I want you to just hear the kind of rhetoric that young people are being exposed to today.
Thank you, Cornelia, for that kind introduction. So I want to start out by addressing the younger people in the room, which is the majority of you, younger than me. And what I want to say to you is slightly stark, is this: that your leaders have failed you, your governments have failed you, your parents and their generation have failed you, your teachers have failed you, and I failed you. And what I mean by that is that we have all failed to warn adequately and to prevent the dangerous climate change that is now here and that is coming and that is definitely going to get a lot worse. Definitely. And because of that failure, I'm afraid for you. I have fear for you. I fear that some of you are unlikely to grow old. And there is nothing really worse for human beings than not being able to take adequate care of the next generation.
All right, so you can see that the talk's title is "This Civilization is Finished." It's the end. And young people today have been told this over the course of the last decade plus, and the rhetoric has only increased. This is the title of a presentation. We're not going to watch any of it, from the founder of an organization by the name of Extinction Rebellion. Some of you have heard of Extinction Rebellion. Yes, they tape themselves or glue themselves to the highway, and they demonstrate in the streets, and they cover themselves with blood, and they say this is the end of the world. And they do everything they can to shut down society, because they say if we do not stop driving our cars, this planet is going to be incinerated. And so the title of the talk provided to these people, advice to young people as they face annihilation. And the message that young people have been hearing is that if we do not immediately take steps to alter the fundamental way that society operates, the planet is doomed and you are doomed along with it. And this is how they have grown up. And as Seventh-day Adventists, first of all, we don't believe that, or at least we shouldn't believe it, that God somehow is like an absentee landlord and he has abandoned the planet. And if we don't stop driving our cars, the planet is going to combust. What does that say about God? But this is what they believe. And we are going to look at whether or not everything that is going on in this subject, with this subject, is related to the question of Bible prophecy. Going back to the ancient historian Josephus, speaking of the Tower of Babel, Josephus notes that there was a multitude of people who were ready to follow Nimrod. The Bible speaks of Nimrod as the person who founded Babylon and built the Tower of Babel. They had been told to disperse and go out into all the earth, and you could see here that they built this tower, and they had bitumen or slime for mortar, and they built the tower that is called Babylon, and it has been proven archaeologically that this tower was real. A stela was found with Nebuchadnezzar's inscription himself on it, saying that he had rebuilt the ancient Tower of Babel. You can look this up. It's not. There's no slide on this. Genesis 11. We see the story of the Tower of Babel, and we see some interesting things. First of all of the earth was of one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Now God had told them to disperse, but instead of dispersing, they said, no, we like the plain of Shinar, we're going to build. The question is why did they build? They said, okay, let us make brick, burn them thoroughly, and they had brick for stone, slime had they for mortar, and they built this tower that was to reach unto heaven. So notice this, that you have a nation that is a group of people that is all of one language, coming together in a place to build something. A city, in fact, and a tower. And it was to reach up to heaven. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men built. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. This they begin to do. Now nothing will be restrained from them. So what does the Lord say? He says, because they all speak the same language and they can understand each other, their common purpose, if I don't do something, they will be able to do whatever they want. And so the Lord said, I'm going to confuse their languages so that they are not able to accomplish their ends. And I would propose to you today that what happened in ancient Babylon that was stopped by God will be allowed to be completed at the end. Do we not come to the point where we all understand each other on this planet again? We can speak through universal translators. We have artificial intelligence. We can speak to each other. Everybody hears what they hear, they understand. And the Lord dispersed them. In fact, he comes down and he knocks the top of the tower off, we're told in the spirit of prophecy. And the Lord scatters them abroad from there upon the face of the earth. And they left off building the city, and it was called Babel. Now, You think, well, what does this story have to do with anything? How could this be prophetic? I'd like you to notice a couple things. First of all, Nimrod, this man, he was a bold man. And he wanted to rule the world, we see, in Josephus. And he says to himself, there is only one way of changing the government into tyranny. I must turn men from the fear of God, but to bring them into a constant dependence upon his own power. And so Nimrod decided that he would be a dictator and a tyrant. And he said to himself that he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again, for that he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. So Nimrod was a tyrant. He gathered a group of people together to build. He was a rebel. In fact, his name in Hebrew means rebellion. Nimrod. Tyrant, rebel, and a builder of cities. And he was one more thing. He was a climate agitator. In fact, he was the world's first climate agitator. And the purpose for which Babylon was originally built was to prevent a climate catastrophe. Just let that sink in as you think about what is going on in the world today and the proposal for one world government and the proposal that we must do something to save ourselves. Now, lest you think Josephus is not a reliable source, the Spirit of Prophecy says that one object of Nimrod in the building of the tower was to secure their own safety in case of another deluge. So she says what Josephus says. By carrying the structure to a much greater height than was reached by the waters of the flood, they thought to place themselves beyond all possibility of danger. So the purpose of the building of the Tower of Babel, I'm sure. Nimrod said, this is going to be a universal empire. This is going to be the capital of a one world government. We are going to be a great people. He massaged their egos. He told them their prosperity was going to be great. Their real estate was going to be very valuable. I'm sure he said all of those things. But he also used fear to tell them that if they did not build, they would all die, according to Josephus and according to the Spirit of Prophecy. And he secured the will of thousands upon thousands of people for what some sources say was decades, 43 to 45 years, according to some sources. You can go look this up. God had directed men to disperse throughout the earth, to replenish and subdue it, but these Babel builders determined to keep their community and to found a monarchy that should eventually embrace the whole earth. So that's very interesting, I would propose to you. That the purpose for which Babylon was originally built was to prevent against a climate change catastrophe and to have a one world government. And those are the things that we see taking place today about this subject. Now, here is another point that I think is very important. The building of the Tower of Babel was in express disbelief and even defiance of the promise of God. So God had said in Genesis 9:6, he said, I establish my covenant, the rainbow. I will never again destroy the earth with the water of a flood. This is the token. I place it in the heavens. Every time it rains and you're concerned and you think it's never going to stop, here is my promise, it's going to stop. You can trust me. Now that symbol has been co-opted in our society, has it not? We won't say more about that at this time. Fast forward to modern Babylon and the building of a one-world system. Now again, you hear perhaps from your favorite minister of various denominations that this is irrelevant. In fact, that we ought to be behind the efforts to save the planet. This is a picture of Yuval Noah Harari at the Frontiers Forum Live 2023, and you will see in the background an image. Now, this image was generated by artificial intelligence. And you'll notice that it's the Tower of Babel. Not only is it the Tower of Babel, but it is an updated Tower of Babel, because in the city behind you see electric lights. And in the tower itself, you see electric lights. And so this is a modern version. Now, for a long time, my entire lifetime, we have been told that climate change is a catastrophe. And I may or may not have a slide in here of one of the senators in the U.S. Senate going through all of the false predictions from the climate change people about what is going to happen. It's very interesting. I can't remember if I put it in here. Maybe we'll come to it or not. But the point is that this is something that has been agitated for a long time. I gave this talk at a church, and there was a young person in the congregation. As soon as he saw what the topic was in the bulletin, he stood up and he left. And I saw him afterwards, and I said, "You didn't stay for the talk?" And he said, "No, because I'd have to argue with you." And I said, "Why?" And he says, "Because you're wrong." Because he has been indoctrinated. He's been brainwashed into thinking that the planet is about to incinerate itself. Overconsumption and overpopulation underlie every environmental problem we face today. Jacques Cousteau, famous French scientist. In order to stabilize world population, we must eliminate 350,000 per day. So does Jacques Cousteau want more people on the planet or less? Okay, a lot less. In fact, he's proposing to murder 350,000 people. Now, he might have been a fantastic scientist, and he loved the whales. But if you want to wipe out 350,000 people on the basis that you think there's too many people on the planet, the Bible would call you a murderer. New scientists say breathing is bad for the environment. December 13, 2023. So this is a month ago. The article continues. New study was led by Dr. Nicholas Cowan, an atmospheric physicist at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology in Edinburgh. Exhaled human breath can contain small elevated concentrations of methane and nitrous oxide, both of which contribute to global warming. And he's saying we would urge caution in the assumption that emissions, notice the wording, emissions from humans are negligible. So this is a scientific study, it's peer-reviewed. Now, cars have emissions. Trucks have emissions. People do not have emissions. People are alive. Trucks are not alive. Okay, but you see the dehumanization in the language. You are not a human being any longer. You are an emitter. And there's too many emitters on the planet. We must do something about this. Here's David Attenborough, Planet Earth, greatness and fame. Look at the zebra and the gazelle and the giraffe. How many of you like Planet Earth? Wonderful video. David Attenborough says that humanity is a plague. And I dare say that he would say the same thing about you and me. It's not just climate change. It's sheer space, places to grow food for this enormous horde. Either we limit our population growth or the natural world will do it for us. Now, there was a law professor at Sheridan Institute of Higher Education in Australia who objected to this sort of rhetoric. And he said the following, and I think he's absolutely right. We should be deeply suspicious of any argument that employs language that refers to humans as an invasive virus or a plague or even a problem that needs to be resolved. This is an argument that portrays a desire to bring death at a large scale. Can you see how he would come to that conclusion? This is Scientific America, May 4th, 2023. Population decline will change the world for the better. Scientific America, do they want the population to go up or down? 8 billion people in the world is a crisis, not an achievement. Same magazine. And you can see the diagram there of a lot of people in pots who don't produce anything, but they're all feeding each other. So again, it's very dehumanizing. So is this related? Is the desire to wipe out a large portion of people on the earth, is that possibly related to Bible prophecy? Okay. Let's see. Jesus told a parable in Matthew chapter 13. He says that the kingdom of heaven is like a man which sowed good seed in his field. Some of you like to garden, I don't doubt. You go to Home Depot or you go to your heirloom store and you buy packets of seeds. And you go and you mix your mulch and your soil and you put the seed in the soil and you water it and you wait for the green shoots to come up. My wife is very happy. She sees the potatoes come up and she calls me over. Look at the potatoes! And it's amazing. And so Jesus is talking about this miracle where the sower plants in good soil and up comes the plant. But, he says, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. Now, Jesus' enemy is the devil. And Jesus himself says this in the explanation of the parable. And when the blade is spring up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So you're looking at your garden, you have potatoes, and then you have something that looks sort of like potatoes, and you're not sure. And the servants come to the householder and says, "Sir, did you not sow good seed? You put the good seed in. Why are there weeds in the pot?" And the master says, "An enemy has done this." And the servants say, "Well, let's go. We'll go pick them. We'll get rid of the weeds." And he says, "No. Let them grow together until the harvest. That way, when you look at what you planted, it will become apparent. You have weeds and you have tares. And it is only when they are fully mature that you see which are which. You can't start pulling them up in advance of this because you're going to pull up good stuff. Let them grow together." Now, the disciples came to Jesus. And you have all read this, I'm sure. The disciples come to Jesus and they say, "Well, what does this mean? Show us." And he answered them, verse 37, and he said, "He that sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. Therefore, the tares are gathered and burned in the field, so shall it be at the end of this world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of the kingdom all things that offend, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who has ears, let him hear." And so you see here that the whole idea is that good seed, which is the gospel, planted in the heart, when it grows up, it produces the likeness of Christ, right? But the bad seed planted in the soil grows up into the character of somebody very different. But you can't see who that person is until the seed is fully matured. So if the gospel seed looks like Christ, who does the seed from the enemy look like? It looks like Satan. So at the end of the world, according to Jesus, you're going to have people who the gospel has flourished into life, but you're going to have people who Satan's seed has come fully to maturity. And so the question is, what does the world look like at the end, according to Jesus? Who was Satan? Satan was a murderer from the beginning, and he was a liar. And so the principle of Satan's kingdom, when fully developed, what would you expect it to produce in his followers? You would expect it to produce a large group of murderers, would you not? The fact is that evolution, when it is fully developed, and evolution is one of Satan's favorite philosophies, when it is fully developed, it always results in murder. Why? Because evolution does not recognize any obligation for there to be right or wrong or justice or accountability. There is no God. There is no right and wrong. There is no creator. Evolution says it's survival of the fittest. It's not do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's do whatever you can to get past and above your person who is competing with you for the resources on this planet. So the elites on the planet who want to kill the majority of the people on the planet, we're going to come to more of that in a moment here, they are exhibiting the very characteristics that are foundational to Satan. because he was a murderer from the beginning. So the question is I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this just very briefly because I think that it's important. Charles Darwin's seminal work, which he began writing in the year approximately 1844, which was also the year that modern spiritualism came up. Very interesting date. And Charles Darwin's full name of his book was The Origins of the Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Now, you don't hear the second part of that title much. People don't talk about it. But the bottom line is that Darwin's work itself talks about eugenics. It talks about the survival of favored races and the elimination of races who are not favored, or groups of people who are not elite. And so inherent in the idea of evolution is that it will be the strong and the elite who survive. Now, in the United States of America, we have a principle in the Declaration of Independence. Now, that Declaration of Independence, according to Abraham Lincoln, was meant to have universal application to all the people of the earth, not just to Americans. And you know what the words say in the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created by God and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Now, the concept of rights in the foundation of the United States is that rights come from the Creator. If you eliminate the Creator, you also eliminate rights. Is that clear enough? There are a lot of people who say, well, I believe in evolution, but I also believe in rights. Evolution does not have any place for rights as an endowment, as an inherent trait that is given to every people by the Creator. Rights in the evolutionary mindset is a social construct. It comes from the government. The government gives you rights and the government can take it away. When push comes to shove, that must be the way it is. Because there is no Creator. There is no person who reached down and formed Adam from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The breath of life. If you look carefully at Genesis, you will see that at the beginning, God gives Adam and Eve life, liberty, and actual happiness. Not just the pursuit of happiness, but life, liberty, and actual happiness. Happiness that we could not even dream of as a gift from the Creator to every person. Why can we not dream of it? Because we're going to die. But yet they had conditional immortality as long as they were faithful to God. They had almost limitless liberty, a liberty that we cannot understand at this point in time. One day we will. One day we will. But they had no barbed wire with the except to one place. They had the run of the whole planet. And they had actual happiness. No sorrow, no death, no crying, no suffering, no loss of loved ones. No pain. And when Adam fell, he forfeited that. But if you read Genesis chapter 3, you will see that God gives back life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those very ideas come from the creation story. And then in the fall, God gives them back to Adam because the lamb is slain to buy life for humanity. And he gives them liberty of conscience because he says in Genesis chapter 3:15, I will put enmity between yourself and the serpent. Enmity is liberty because without that enmity, without the ability to say no to Satan, you'd be a slave. And he gives the pursuit of happiness. And so where does the codified rights in the Declaration of Independence come from? They come from those principles in the Bible, from the Creator. And the first point that I really want to make to you today is that you are either a creationist or you are an evolutionist. If you're on the fence, get off the fence. Satan owns the fence. There's no middle ground in this question. Either rights come from God and they are an endowment from the Creator, or they come from the state and the state can take them away. And you are just an emitter. But we know that you were made in the image of God. We'll come to that here before the end of this talk. Now I would like you to hear what some of the elites say about you.
What's the second highest
the
priority?
second biggest thing is global climate change.
Okay.
We've got to, and for so many reasons, we've got to move off of fossil fuel. Not doing it will be catastrophic. We'll have 8 degrees, we'll be 8 degrees hotter in 30 or 40 years, and basically none of the crops will grow. Most of the people will have died, and the rest of us will be cannibals. Civilization will have broken down. What the few people who are left will be living in a failed state like Somalia or Sudan, and living conditions will be intolerable. The droughts will be so bad there'll be no more corn growing. Not doing it is suicide. And then after that, we've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there were
so what's wrong with the population? I mean,
with too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. But if there were less people, they'd be using less stuff.
What's the proposal to do with those people? You got to get rid of a significant number of the people in the world. Ted Turner says a total world population of 250 to 300 million people, a 95% decline from present levels would be ideal. I dare say that is everybody in this room. Now, is he the only one?
What do you see as the biggest challenges in conservation?
The growing human population. Because if where we are, there's nothing else.
And do you have views about what should be done about that?
Can't you guess?
Well, it could be on a spectrum from mass sterilisation to greater availability of contraception. I don't know what your views are as to what can be done about it.
Well, I think it might be described as voluntary family limitation.
In the event that I am reincarnated, I would like to return as a deadly virus in order to contribute something to solve overpopulation. So does Prince Philip want there to be more people or less people in the world? Okay. Now, I took out some of the slides here of people talking about this. I still think I have quite a few of them. But the fact is that the elites of the planet definitely think there's too many people on the planet. And they propose, in fact, increasingly openly, for the sake of saving the planet, eliminating a significant portion of people on the planet. Now, that should raise a question in your mind's eye, in your mind, about what gives them the right to plan to eliminate a significant portion of the people on Earth. But it is steeped, what I want you to see is that it's steeped in the evolutionary paradigm. This is survival of the fittest. There's no God who's coming back. There's no God who's overseeing the allocation of resources. There's nobody who's watching what's going on down here. We have to save ourselves. That's the mentality. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, July 27, 2023. Again, listen to the rhetoric here if you want to see why young people are scared. Climate change is here. It is terrifying, and it is just the beginning. The era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived. So we're not in global warming anymore. Now it's global boiling. The heat is unbearable. The air is unbreathable. Now, thankfully, all of us in this room are still breathing. So, I think we can all agree that this is a significant amount of hyperbole from the president of the UN Secretary General of the UN. He's saying we must do something now. No more hesitancy, no more excuses, no more waiting for others to move first. There is simply no more time for that. So he is saying, this is the head of the UN, that something must be done now. And I think that we need to, as Seventh-day Adventists and as Christians of whatever persuasion, you need to look at this question honestly, instead of pretending like it doesn't exist. Or instead of, like so many ministers are saying, don't look at this question, this is irrelevant to Bible prophecy. You have the leaders of the world coming together saying something must be done now, right now. We have to have one world government now. We have to have one world authority to stop climate change now. So this is Pope Francis on the release of his latest apostolic exhortation. Of course, apostolic because he says he's the successor to St. Peter, which is why it's called an apostolic exhortation as opposed to just simply an exhortation, like you or I would write. This has the authority of the apostles, according to the Pope.
With the global gathering of Catholic bishops as a backdrop, Pope Francis warned the world is approaching the point of no return on climate. Amen. Published in a booklet, the Pontiff's most forceful intervention yet in the climate crisis. Our responses have not been adequate, he wrote, while the world is collapsing and may be near the breaking point. He urged decisive acceleration to renewable energies and away from oil and gas, suggesting that interim solutions like carbon capture risk pasting and papering over cracks. He called out rich countries on their failure of conscience and responsibility.
What I see coming from Pope Francis is heartbreak. He seems to just be sad that too little action has happened.
The Pope, who chose the name Francis, the patron of ecology, urged leaders headed to COP28, the climate conference in Dubai next month, to do much more.
He finally said everything that needs to be said about the urgency of the climate crisis, the injustice of the impacts, and the fact that the structures of power and wealth in this world are the ones standing in the way of meaningful action.
All right, I think it would be interesting reading for you to read Laudato Deum, which is the Pope's apostolic exhortation. In that book, he requests the U.S. to lead on this issue. Now, at the end of time, we expect the papacy and the lamb-like beast to work together for the purposes of forming one world, a one-world initiative to bring in the mark. And so, one of the things that I'm mystified about is how come we don't hear more talk about this? COP28 just finished, and we'll get to COP28 just here momentarily. The Lord says in Genesis 8:21 that he would never again curse the ground anymore for man's sake. So there were 3 curses. First at sin, secondly when Cain slew Abel, and third at the flood. And God says after the flood, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Not only that, the Lord says this, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. Now, according to the Pope, we are near the breaking point. According to the head of the UN, we are at climate boiling. According to the Bible, we never get to climate boiling before the end. Seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter continue until the end. According to God, who wrote the Bible, who, quite frankly, is who Pope Francis should be more concerned about than trying to rally, support for the climate narrative. God says life will be sustained by planet Earth until the second coming of Christ. That is God's promise to you. So, on the off chance that there is anybody in this congregation who is abundantly concerned and losing sleep about whether or not tomorrow, if we don't stop driving our cars, we're all going to be incinerated, you can rest assured that the God who created this planet is not an absentee landlord. He is still in control. He hasn't gone on a vacation and abandoned us. And he's coming back. And I'd like to hear the Pope talk about that. I think that would be responsible Christianity. Now, at the end of the world, there is 3 messages that go to all the earth. The first message of the first angel in Revelation chapter 14 is fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. And worship him who created the heavens and the earth, the seas and the fountains of water. And this angel goes with the everlasting gospel to every person on the planet. And the gospel says to people The exact opposite of what Ted Turner is saying. The gospel says you were bought with a price. Jesus laid down his life for your sins to buy you back. There is no such thing as a useless human being. There's no such thing as people who need to be eliminated because they're emitters. It's totally contrary to the scriptures. Now, just to drive home the point about the difference between the evolutionary mindset, I think personally that we are seeing Revelation chapter 14 come into focus today. Because that first angel's message is a call to worship the Creator. And the evolutionary mind, if you go outside these walls, the people outside don't believe in a Creator because they have been brainwashed by the school system and by society to be told that there is no God and there is no Creator and there is no such thing as a Redeemer. Jesus is not coming back. There's no meaning to life. That is what they are taught in the school system. And that's why you have so many young people killing themselves, because they're being told that they are highly developed monkeys. Now, there is a vast difference between the biblical narrative about people and the worth of each person and the evolutionary mindset, where you have a group of murderers saying, let's get rid of a significant portion of the world. Well, let's hear from them personally.
Now, you may find it acceptable that, yes, in the religious field, humans cooperate by believing in the same fictions. Millions of people come together to build a cathedral or a mosque or fight on a crusade or in a jihad because they all believe in the same stories about God and heaven and hell. But what I want to emphasize is that exactly the same mechanism underlies all other forms of mass-scale human cooperation, not only in the religious field. Take, for example, the legal field. Most legal systems today in the world are based on a belief in human rights. But what are human rights? Human rights, just like God and heaven, are just a story that we've invented. They are not an objective reality. They are not some biological fact about Homo sapiens. Take a human being, cut him open, look inside, you will find the heart, the kidneys, neurons, hormones, DNA, but you won't find any rights. The only place you find rights is in the stories that we have invented and spread around over the last few centuries. They may be very positive stories, very good stories, but they are still just fictional stories that we've invented.
Okay, in the book, if I understand it correctly, you argue that actually the amazing breakthrough that we are experiencing right now not only will potentially make our life better, but they will create, and I quote you, new classes and new class struggles, just as the Industrial Revolution did. Can you elaborate for us?
Yes, in the Industrial Revolution, we saw the creation of a new class of the urban proletariat, and much of the political and social history of the last 200 years involved what to do with this class and the new problems and opportunities. Now, we see the creation of a new massive class of useless people. As computers become better and better in more and more fields, there is a distinct possibility that computers will outperform us in most tasks and will make humans redundant. And then the big political and economic question of the 21st century will be, what do we need humans for? Or at least, what do we need so many humans for?
Do you have an answer in the book?
At present, the best guess we have is keep them happy with drugs and computer games. But this doesn't sound like a very appealing future.
Okay, so you're basically saying in the book, and now that for all the discussion about the growing evidence of significant economic inequality, we are just kind of at the beginning of the process?
Again, it's not a prophecy. It's seeing all kinds of possibilities before us. One possibility is this creation of a new massive class of useless people. Another possibility is the division of humankind into different biological castes, with the rich being upgraded into virtual gods and the poor being degraded to this level of useless people.
I feel there is an...
All right, so the things that I would like to point out with respect to what he's saying, and I do think it's very important, it's not something to gloss over. First of all, the only place you have rights is in the stories. What stories is he speaking of? He's talking about the Bible. The place that you find rights and the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is in the scriptures. Then you have it in the Declaration. So this is an attack on the Declaration, which is an attack on the foundation of the idea of the United States of America, but also the idea that everybody on the planet is created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. The second thing that you should see is that he is completely indifferent to the idea of wiping people out. It gets dark fast in the evolutionary paradigm. Take a person, cut them open, and you'll find the heart, the liver, and the kidneys, but you won't find any rights. This is from the author of a book endorsed by very prominent people. And people laugh and they cheer when they hear him. But what he's speaking about is genocide. Henry Kissinger just died. Henry Kissinger, everybody, you click on your TV and you see everybody's talking about how wonderful Henry Kissinger was. Henry Kissinger was also a major architect of population control. Apart from his public role in U.S. foreign policy, Kissinger was a key leader in the global depopulation movement. Furthermore, Kissinger was Klaus Schwab's mentor. Now, you should know the name Klaus Schwab. He's the head of the World Economic Forum. They're getting ready to have the meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland right now. That's the big meeting of all the many heads of state. It's by invitation only, and the heads of major companies. And Kissinger called for a global post-coronavirus order and recommended a reshaping of the global order. WEF member calls for 86% reduction in world's population. This is Dennis Meadows. The date on this article is May 3rd, 2023. A celebrated member of the globalist World Economic Forum has called for a staggering 86% reduction in the population of humans, arguing that the goal can be achieved peacefully. Now, I don't know how you wipe out 86% of the population peacefully. This is one of the main authors of a book called The Limits to Growth. It was released by the Club of Rome, and this guy, Dennis Meadows, is an honorary member of the Club of Rome and a member of the World Economic Forum. He insists that a benevolent dictatorship could accomplish the mass depopulation peacefully, and you'll see above there it says he claims that the genocide of 86% of the world's population is inevitable. So he's saying it needs to happen. And just, you might think that this is happening in the corner, this is conspiracy theory. Friends, this is not conspiracy theory anymore. This is conspiracy fact. And it's just being said in the open. He says, we want to have freedom, we want to have a high standard of living, so we are going to have 1 billion people. So he's saying you got to go down from, he says 7, but it's really 8. I hope that this can be slow, relatively slow, and that it can be done in a way which is relatively equal, so that people share the experience. In case you're wondering who the Club of Rome is, it's a non-profit, informal organization of intellectuals. It's founded in 1968 in Rome. Consists of 100 full members selected from current and former heads of state, UN administrators, high-level politicians, government officials, diplomats, scientists, economists, and business leaders from around the globe. So their book, the most popular environmental book of all time, 30 million copies sold, their book says we got to have a massive reduction in the population. So the coalition of the parties just finished on December 12th. in the coalition of the parties this year, which is very interesting because, of course, the United Nations is the United Nations of the world, the nations. But the coalition of the parties is different. It's organized by the United Nations, as you can see from the upper left-hand corner there, United Nations, Coalition of the Parties, 28. The coalition of the parties includes all the world's religions as well. And for the first time ever this year, they had a pavilion right in the middle of COP28 where you had the world's religions asking the government to do something about climate change because it was a religious issue. And they were led by the papacy. This is from the Pope's inaugural address. That word inauguration is an ancient word, and it is speaking of to consult the augur, which is the omens. When some major event happens, the inauguration, anyways, you can look up the etymology of that word. So Pope Francis says some very interesting things in his inaugural address here, COP28, to all of the religions. He says, it is the first of its kind, being the faith pavilion, this big tent where all the world's religions mostly were there. It shows that all authentic religious beliefs are a source of encounter and action. You'll notice that those very interesting words. You have to parse everything Pope Francis says. He doesn't just talk straight. He's like this, right? So he's saying all authentic religious belief systems are a source of encounter. What does he mean by that? It means if you have legitimate religious beliefs, you will be part of the ecumenical movement to save the planet. By contrast, if you do not have legitimate religious beliefs, you will not join us. So he is othering the people who are not on side with this agenda. And he says your beliefs will translate into action. That means following the lead of the papacy, if your religious beliefs are legitimate. So he says, we have a duty to protect our common home. It's a religious problem. Its roots lie in the creature's presumption of self-sufficiency. And then he says, we have to act to save the planet. So he's saying, we have got to do something immediately. And then he says this is his concluding paragraph. Peacekeeping is also a task for the religions. May our actions not contradict the words we speak. May we not merely speak about peace, but take a stand against those who claim to be believers, yet fuel hatred and do not oppose violence. And when he's saying violence there, he's not talking about like punching somebody. He's talking about violence against the planet. So he is saying, again, that there are people out there who are not part of the agenda. They do not subscribe to the efforts to save Mother Earth. Those people have to be stood against. Some of Francis's key talking points, just generally, if you're familiar with the work Laudato Si released in 2015, it is nearly too late to save the earth. Ecological conversion is required. Notice ecological conversion, that's talking about ecology and the earth, not spiritual conversion. All authentic religious beliefs give rise to encounter. We must build together to save the common home. That is the Babylonian language from the Tower of Babel. Nimrod gets everybody together and says we have to build to save the planet. Francis is gathering everybody together and he's saying we must build together to save the planet. And what I want you to see is that this is related. Babylon was being built in the past to save the planet for the purposes of combating climate change, and that is the purpose of the new building of Babylon. Nations must give way to global authority. So Pope Francis, his entire papacy, the popes for the last 500 years have decried national rights. The idea of national sovereignty cuts against papal authority. When the papacy issued a bull condemning Martin Luther took it and he burnt it in the gate. You remember when that happened? I mean, you weren't there, but you know about it in history. Martin Luther burnt that bull. And the papacy said, send that heretic to Rome. And the German princes said, well, we want to have a trial to hear if he's guilty. And the papacy said, how dare you want to have a trial? I've already declared that Martin Luther is a heretic. It's not your place to determine as a nation whether or not he's guilty. Hand him over. And so at the root of the opposition to national sovereignty and individual rights is this idea that there is papal sovereignty and it is supreme. That's never something that the papacy has given up. Nations must give way to global authority. We must stand against those who hurt the earth. And we need a new class of criminal offenses called ecocide, because you're killing the environment. At the end of COP28, they came together to transition away from fossil fuels, oil and gas, and they issued a statement saying that this is the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. UN Climate Change News again said that this is the beginning of the end. Now, the modern world was built on energy. You cannot take away energy and expect developing countries to develop. Furthermore, you cannot take away energy and expect the planet to produce enough food and have enough transportation to sustain life amongst the people. If this takes place, it's going to result in the death of billions. That's not my projection, that's other people's prediction. We'll come to the slide in a moment here. So COP28 featured the gathering of all nations, just about, almost 200, the gathering of nearly all religions, the declaration by the papacy that the climate change is a religious issue, the world's religions lobbying the world's governments to make agreement and laws which address climate change, and compliance by the governments of the world to make an agreement at the urging of the churches. So you have the churches urging the state to do something for a religious reason. What do we expect to see in Revelation 17? We expect to see the papacy ruling over the nations and churches of the earth. And at COP28, we're seeing exactly that. So this is an indication that the end of Jesus is near, very near. Now, the worship of the earth is a pagan thing. Earth worship has been going on for centuries. And the worshiping of fertility goddesses and things like that. But inherent in this whole movement is the idea of earth worship. And just to prove that, let's watch this.
Pope Francis joined Amazonian church workers and indigenous people on October 4th to plant a tree in the Vatican gardens. The event marked the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. He also consecrated the Synod for the Amazon to St. Francis. The Synod will be held at the Vatican from October 6th through October 27th. About 20 delegates from Amazonian countries opened the ceremony, singing and dancing around a mandala of Amazonian symbols. The symbols included a banner with a photograph of Sister Dorothy Stang, a missionary from Dayton, Ohio, who was murdered in Brazil in 2005 because of her defense of small farmers' land rights. Members of various church groups brought offerings of soil from symbolic places, including the Amazon, which has a rich cultural heritage but is also a land where martyrs have died. Soil also came from India, a country vulnerable to climate change, countries where people are trafficked or forced to migrate, places where young people participate in climate change demonstrations, and the Shrine of the Renunciation in Assisi.
A shaman who performed a ceremony there, and of course a shaman his very function is to make contact with the other world and the spirits, the demons of the other world, and be used as a conduit for them. But you see here everybody bowing down to Pachamama. Pachamama is Mother Earth. There's Pope Francis with Pachamama. Now, a lot of Catholics were upset about this. There's Pachamama being given to Francis. Everybody's bowing down to her. And there she is in the Vatican, in the canoe. Here's the coin that was minted about the occasion. Pachamama. Now, some Catholics were very upset at this, and they went and they took Pachamama and they threw her into the Tiber River. Well, they got a new Pachamama and they brought her back and they reconsecrated her. Mother Earth. Now, this type of worship is not new. It's been going on since ancient times. And the worship of Mother Earth. Let's watch a short presentation from one of the modern corporations.
No Camaru Anuri, no Camai, no Camwaka, na Anuri, no Yuyuá, na Wahon Chinam, Punk and Tushina Shavawaki, Chinamu Kikirani, Tsai Shavakirani, Tsai Makikirani. Awama Wanana, Awama Wanana, no Mahono Wai Sharai.
And Apple offices are already carbon neutral.
Yeah. This building is carbon neutral?
Oh, yeah, we do it with a mix of clean energy and eliminating greenhouse emissions. It's kind of like if you were to...
You're seriously explaining carbon neutrality to Mother Nature?
When Cain brought his offerings to the altar, what were they? They were his works to appease the deity. And what has crept into our culture is earth worship and Baal worship, and attributing the rain and the sunshine not to the God of the heavens, who is the creator, who also gives rights to humanity, but to Mother Nature, and that is Baal worship. And Mother Nature is a fickle goddess, is she not? We talked about this. This is the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. This is Lynn Rothschild. We're offending everybody here today. Lynn Rothschild, she's the president, and Pope Francis is the moral authority behind the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. The Council for Inclusive Capitalism is a group of increasingly some of the largest corporations in the world. I guarantee you in your wallets you probably have a MasterCard or a Visa. Well, MasterCard and Visa are both in the Council for Inclusive Capitalism under the leadership of Pope Francis. The state of California is one of the members of the Guardians, part of the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. And so if you are wondering where we are in the timeline of Bible prophecy, the point of this talk is to show you that the things that we have been told would happen, not just will happen, they are happening. They are happening now, today. And I would propose to you that there is a limited amount of time that you have to go out and to share the three angels' messages. The gospel that must go to all the world must go soon. Now, you'll see what's being proposed here by the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, and that is that the existing system must be replaced by what's called stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism is not capitalism at all. It basically is fascism, where you have government controlling private industry. That is what stakeholder capitalism is. And this type of control is increasingly coming. Now you see here this quote from Prophets and Kings. The people were urged by their leaders to have confidence in the power of Baal and to set aside as idle words the prophecy of Elijah. The priests still insisted that it was through the power of Baal that the showers of rain fell. So what is this speaking of? This is speaking of that moment when Elijah comes and says to King Ahab, "There will not be dew or rain until I say." And then he leaves. And Jezebel and Ahab and all of the prophets said, that's a fiction, fake news, misinformation. Don't listen to Elijah. But the time stretched. But the point that you need to recognize is that in the scriptures there are multiple examples of climate change. Do Do you know what causes climate change? It's not carbon dioxide. It's sin. And the flood was a result of the earth being filled with violence and the thoughts of men's heart being only iniquity continually. And that describes our day to a T. And Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah and in the days of Lot, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. And it's not that that is future, we are there. And time is short. Whenever Israel or the nation decided to apostatize like this, there were consequences. And because they specifically had apostatized by putting their faith in the God of storms, in Baal, God took away the dew and the rain. Because Baal is the one who said that he brought the dew and the rain. And I think that we are going to see big changes in the earth, and they are going to be blamed on God's people. They're going to be blamed on you and me. They're going to be blamed on those people who don't have authentic religious beliefs. Now, Babylon is described as a harlot. Why? Because she's in an illicit relationship with the kings of the earth, and so are her daughters. COP28 is a description of Revelation 17. I'm not sure what else needs to happen for us to say, okay, we're seeing prophecy being fulfilled. All the authentic religions, all the acceptable religions, they signed a statement called the Confluence of Conscience Uniting for Planetary Resurgence. This is a list of everybody who was there. Shinto, Buddhist, Hindu, Jew, Muslim, Evangelical, Catholic, Baha'i. It's a big list. ADRA was at COP28 too. I am in awe of the spirit of cooperation that has brought everybody together, says John Kerry. This document sends very strong messages to the world. We have to transition away from fossil fuels. That era must end, and it must end with justice and equity. Now, according to some estimates, the net zero goal would kill 4 billion people on the planet. That's 50% of the Earth's population. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but what is being proposed to save the planet, I hope you can see, is the elimination of a significant amount of us. Now, we know that the plain of Shinar in the scriptures where Babylon was originally built was a very significant location. Babylon was built on Shinar, and then what happened on Shinar? The Hebrew worthies stood in front of the image, the metal image, and they were ordered by Nebuchadnezzar to bow down and worship that image. And 3 of them refused out of all of the groups that were there. And today, ancient Babylon is being rebuilt, and soon you will hear the music play and the command to worship the image that is set up. Okay. Set up by the nations and the churches all together. And this is the message that must be given. And I would say to you, friends, that the very fact that so many people, even in our church, are saying it could be 500 years before Jesus comes. Did you know we are told in the spirit of prophecy, do not put off the coming of the Lord? Do not put off the coming of the Lord. And in the end, perilous times will come, and that men will be lovers of their own selves, scoffers, and they're going to say, where is the promise of his coming? How many people do you hear that from these days? The very fact that they say that is a fulfillment of prophecy. Jesus is coming again. And today, not just is evolution taught in our world, it is taught in our own schools, unapologetically, without shame. and there are no rights in evolution. Thank you for listening to this presentation. I know that it's a solemn one. It's not happy, but it is solemn, and we are living in solemn times. And we are told to keep current events in front of the eyes of the people. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer, and then we'll dismiss for a short break. Father in heaven, Lord, I pray that the presentation today would be used to raise questions and alertness in people's eyes, Lord. Lord, we are to be watchmen on the walls and to blow the trumpet with a certain sound and not to be sleeping at our posts, Lord, in this critical hour of Earth's history. In Jesus' name, amen.